In this episode, I talk about the risks of undereating. It's such a common thing that comes up with our clients and patients. And so I figured I should probably just have a succinct video that explains why we think that undereating is such a damage to the body. We listened to the dietary guidelines. All it did was make me sick. I now eat a lot of meat, and so do they. If you want to thrive, you need to eat meat. Meat is required. Meat is non-negotiable. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private functional medicine practice where we focus on root cause healing, and that often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today's going to be a solo, just talking through all the points of why I think undereating can be detrimental and the reasons. And then from there, make it personalized for you to see if what I'm saying makes sense for your case. I do want to put a few disclaimers out there about nuance, about who maybe what I'm sharing may not be as applicable so that you don't get mad at me. But one of the first groups of people is going to be the people that are chronically ill, that may be on an elimination diet, and that may not be able to eat, even if they chose to, the amounts that we're recommending. Sometimes you have to just do good with what you have. And so there is that nuance. The other group that I think is more nuanced are the people that are morbidly obese or struggling with a lot of weight to lose, so hundreds of pounds. The way that you may need to eat may be different. The other thing I just want to say really quickly is not everyone needs to eat whatever I'm going to share all the time, every single day. Our bodies are on circadian rhythm. Sometimes we sleep 8 hours and we feel great. Sometimes we sleep 8 hours and we feel horrible. Sometimes we get 5 hours and we still feel fine that day. In the same vein, just because you're supposed to eat at least like 1,800 calories and 120 grams of protein in a meat doesn't mean that you need to eat that every single day. It's just a general rule of thumb, maybe 5 days a week in general. So don't be so hard pressed to eat in a certain way. We are not robots and our demands are going to be different. The best thing to do is over time is to trust your body's signals that tell you I'm hungry. And so maybe I need to eat a little bit more fat that day. Or the next day, maybe you're not as hungry. And so you don't eat as much. And that's okay. You just don't want so many sequential days where you're not eating enough, where it will then impact your thyroid, your metabolic function, and many other things that we're going to talk about. If you're not even sure how much to eat, I have a whole separate video of how much to ideally eat for hormones, for thyroid function, for overall wellness on a carnivore diet. But you can look at that video. I will put that in the show notes. And then lastly, if you just have a little bit of weight to lose, the best way to do that is to maybe eat 2 meals a day, maybe a small snack, but not to snack in between. Don't let insulin, because insulin even gets impacted with fat and protein, but just to have your square meals and then not eat during other times so your insulin can come down and your immune system, the rest of your body, doesn't have to focus on digestion and it could focus on healing. There's one interesting fact called the microtarian motor complex. It happens in your small intestine that when you don't eat for a while, your small intestine can get to work and clear out extra debris, and it helps purify the small intestine. And it only works if you don't eat for 4-ish hours. And so if you eat in between that, it stops that whole process. So it's another reason that we don't want to be snacking all throughout the day. And I think snacking would be defined as anything that has any amount of calories. Okay, so before we get into why it's dangerous or not ideal to undereat consistently, I want to talk about a few words to ensure that we're all on the same page. There's a group of people or subset, World Health Organization's one. There's also the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, the Harris-Benedict equation, and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I know that they're not perfect bodies, but that is where the basal metabolic rate, our resting heart rate, those definitions of what is normal, what is out of range comes from. And essentially what that really means is that your body requires a certain amount of calories just to exist. So just for your metabolic function, for your heart to be pumping, for you to breathe, for all of your organ systems to be working, the immune system, it requires calories or it requires energy for that to function. So our resting metabolic rate requires calories or energy, and it impacts breathing, your body temperature, organ function, hormones. So your resting metabolic recommendations for women with average weight, it's anywhere 13 to 1500 calories. For males, it's 1600 to 1700 calories. If you're active, the number goes up. But I think this graphic really shows a great example of what is required calorically for your body to thrive. So about 70% of all calories we need. So even if though I say 13 to 1600 for a female, you need 30% more just to be well. 70% of the calories just keep us alive. That's the resting metabolic rate. 19% is to the brain. Lungs take a certain amount. Heart takes 7%. Liver takes 27. Kidneys take 10, other organs take about 19, and 18% is muscle. Obviously, it's very nuanced depending on how much you exercise, how much your digestion is functioning, your age, your medical history. And so the question then becomes, if you are not eating enough, how does your body then prioritize the calories it does receive? Where we get our requirements for calories, again, is this resting metabolic rate, the different groups that have studied how much your RMR should be. And then there were also studies on how much protein we should have. And basically, proteins are needed to repair muscles. It does everything in the system other than giving us energy. And so, if you don't eat enough protein, again, your protein synthesis will absolutely stop. If you think about the way that we build a house, if you're building a brick wall, your protein is like all the different bricks. And if you don't have the amount of amino acids, or to make it super simple, if we don't have enough protein, it will stop building and it'll just stop at that certain place instead of trying to find other ways to continue that protein. So your wall will either be partially built or half built, and then your body will start to show illness or things that are imbalanced. The interviews I've had with protein and muscle experts, such as Dr. Donald Layman, as well as Menno Hanselmas, they talk about eating about zero point 0.7 grams of protein within a meat to about 1.0 grams of protein within a meat. Anything below that is probably insufficient for wellness in the body. So, just to make it really simple, if I were to be 100 pounds, I should probably be consuming at least 70 grams of protein in a day. And so that would probably come out to about one ribeye. The amount of grams of meat that is about, I think it's about 450-ish grams of meat. But in total protein, that gram is about 70 to 80 grams of protein. If you eat under that, so if I'm 100 pounds, or I should be 100 pounds, and I eat less than 16 ounces of meat a day, then I risk under eating. And in the interview with Dr. Donald Layman, he says that there's no point in trying to work out and try to build muscle. If you are not eating sufficient protein, you will not have proper synthesis of proteins. So again, think about that wall. Even if I'm putting all the grout and have all the material, I have all the bricks, but if I don't eat enough protein, that wall will not be built. Your brain only makes up 2% of your weight, but it consumes 20 to 30% of your calories, and that is required. So if other parts of your body are taking up calories, it's either going to impact your brain function to some level, or your brain is going to take majority of those calories and then the other parts of the body will suffer. So some of the signs of under eating on a carnivore diet are these. Constipation is a big one that we see. So if you are not having bowel movements, we hear a lot of times where people will say, I don't have to have a bowel movement for a week. I only go maybe once a week, once every 10 days. That is not ideal, even on a carnivore diet. It's a sign to us in our practice that you are not eating sufficiently. You should be able to go at least, at minimum, once every other day. But if you're drinking enough water, hydrating, having sufficient minerals, if you're eating enough, you'll have enough food coming in and then to have a bowel movement. You need to have bowel movements because that is how one major way your body breaks down toxins, especially the ones that are fat based. So if you are not having bowel movements, your bile will recirculate and it could actually redistribute the toxins. So you want to have bowel movements. It's so important. Yes, you could detox through your skin, your breathing, your urine, but your stool is one of the biggest ways your body detoxes. And a lot of these are hypothyroid related. So think about your body needs all of these different systems to work. You need to have sufficient calories. And then if you're not eating enough, it will start to down-regulate your metabolism. So your body is essentially trying to conserve energy. And in conserving energy, it slows down your metabolism because the thought is, if I slow down Judy's metabolism and maybe I'm just burning 1,000 calories a day instead of the 1,300, then maybe that energy saved will allow Judy to go get food so that then I can function again. So everything will slow down. and that will impact your metabolic function, including everything related to your thyroid. So it won't put as much energy into the skin. And why we have dry skin is a sign of when people aren't well. So these are all symptoms of undereating. Feeling cold, again, that's a symptom of hypothyroid, but it's basically your body is not putting the calories to keep your body warm. And so instead, you're feeling cold. Weakness in muscles and joints, trouble concentrating and remembering. So that's where, again, if your brain takes 20 to 30% of the calories, but your blood sugar is dysregulated, it might prioritize creating cortisol to balance your blood sugar. And so then you may have brain fog and things like that. And then also neurotransmitters. You need to have sufficient protein. You need to have a strong gut. The ironic thing about hypothyroid is that a lot of people will just eat less to hopefully lose weight. But because you're eating less and you're not supporting your body to be a well-oiled machine, it will slow down your metabolism. And so then the amount you used to eat is actually going to make you gain weight. And so this is that conundrum with hypothyroid making your metabolic rate go too low. And so then the goal is that you have to eat more to make the metabolic rate go up. The other things are fatigue and hair loss. Again, classical symptoms of hypothyroid. This is where that conversation of when people say, I went low carb and now my thyroid is messed up. If you're not eating enough, is the thyroid because of the diet or because you're choosing not to eat? Most people on a standard American diet or a diet that's rich in carbohydrates, the carbohydrates come in the system, your liver is processing it, but in the interim, your insulin comes. And if you have any amount of insulin resistance, that will make you feel hungry because now insulin is either overcompensating or working wonky that you're not able to use the energy that you just ate. And if it gets stored in your fat, then you become hungry because you really don't have any energy that you just consumed. So then you are uncontrollably wanting to go and eat. And so that's why people feel hangry. But when you're on a ketogenic or a low carb diet, your insulin is a lot more regulated. And for the first time, you're not feeling as hungry. We naturally start to eat less. And I know there are some people that say, well, just trust your body and eat less. If you're not hungry, don't eat. But your body's getting used to a new way of eating, a new way of signaling, a new way that your body is showing symptoms of undereating. And so you should really pay attention to that. So many times I do not feel hungry, but I remind myself for my muscle mass, for my bone health, for my longevity, for my skin, my hair, my hormones. I eat my second meal to ensure that I will have vibrancy and wellness, not because I'm hungry, because rarely am I hungry for that second meal. So I have to remind myself to eat a lot of times. And as you're doing this diet long term, it becomes a lot more regulated where you will feel a slight hunger to eat. Most people that follow this diet or a low carb diet, ketogenic and carnivore, will not feel as hungry as much. And so they'll start under eating. And then fast forward a few months, they start having symptoms and signs of hypothyroid. And so you can see if that's your story, if you lost weight so quickly, or if you're only eating like one patty a day, or maybe just half a pound of food a day. That is not ideal for anybody on a carnivore diet, not even for children. There's so many areas in your body that also needs those amino acids. So neurotransmitters, those serotonin and dopamine, they are created with proteins. Your T4 and your T3 requires proteins to be converted. So there are other building blocks such as enzymes and cofactors, but if you are not eating sufficient protein, your T4 will not convert to T3. You also need iodine, but that's another conversation. Your hair, your skin, your nails, these are ancillary to the metabolic function. So if your body's not getting enough nutrition, it will always downgrade that in priority. But those all require protein, such as glycine and proline. And so if you're not eating, again, enough protein, you will absolutely impact your wellness. And I know some people may think, well, I'll just eat sufficient protein, but not have fat. But protein is not a sufficient way to get energy. Your energy substrates are either sugars, which we all know that is not an ideal way to get our energy, or it's fatty acids and ketones. One of the reasons why glucose is not the best way to burn energy is because when glucose is producing energy, it has reactive oxygen species, or it creates a little bit of debris and inflammation in creating that, whereas ketones and fatty acids are much more cleaner of a fuel to use. So if you're under eating, say you're just eating chicken breast or you're eating just 700 calories a day, but you're hitting your protein needs, if you're not giving your body the fat substrates, it's going to wreck your hormones. If your cholesterol goes below 190 milligrams per deciliter for total cholesterol, there is a risk of depression and wanting to hurt yourself. So there are nuances with not getting enough fat in your body. Remember, every cell requires fat to thrive, and it's what allows things to go in and out of your cells, for energy to go in and out, for infections, for things to not go in and out of your cells. You need a very strong outer layer that is made by fat, and you need fat for your hormones and energy. And so, again, all of these things get impacted if you are under eating. So, part of the reason why the resting metabolic rate is considered is because of the nutritional amounts that you need for proper function. If you're under eating, again, if you only have a certain amount of vitamin B6 or a vitamin B12 or vitamin C or vitamin D, your body is going to do the best with what it can and it'll prioritize that you survive another day. So, by under eating, you are impacting your nutritional sufficiency. And so that's where then things start to downregulate. And then if you're low with B vitamins, fatty acids, and protein, you'll feel a lot of those symptoms of fatigue and low energy because your body's trying to conserve. It's making you really small so that you could just subsist until you get that balance and abundance of food so that you can thrive and then you can have nice hair and nice skin and have babies. Just a nuance, but if you're having hair loss and hair thinning, yes, it's absolutely can be impacted by under eating, but the major nutrients that you may be deficient in or not digesting and absorbing and assimilating in your body, zinc, iron, and then protein malabsorption. There's also other minerals as well, but if you're eating a rainbow of meat, so making sure you're eating seafood or salmon, eggs, dairy if you can tolerate it, beef, chicken, pork, if you're eating the rainbow, you should be getting the rainbow of nutrition, including minerals. Signs of under eating with hormones specifically is if your thyroid's imbalanced. We've already talked about a lot of the hypothyroid stuff. Most people that we have worked with that had amenorrhea or a loss of period was because they were under eating. And then beyond the under eating, then it's sometimes the environment. So toxins in the air that could be causing too much noise in your system. Oftentimes, amenorrhea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS, a lot of these hormonal imbalances, yes, it could be liver congestion because of all the stuff that you've been exposed to, the foods that you've been eating that weren't ideal. But beyond that, it can be a sign of under eating. One interesting symptom of under eating, especially on a carnivore diet, is when you are craving sugar. Your body will just have you crave whatever will get you motivated enough to go eat. So if that means that you've been trying to eat super clean, eat only meats, and then all of a sudden you're craving sugar, if you are craving sugar because you're stressed, that's a little different. But if you are craving sugar and nothing is really stressful, it's just been status quo, then it often can be a sign that you're under eating or that you're even an underhydrating. When you first start a carnivore diet, your whole metabolism changes because now you're not running mostly on glucose, you're running on fatty acids and ketones. That will change your metabolism. You may all of a sudden be eating a lot more meat than you ever have, and that will impact your digestion. And protein tends to digest a little bit slower than if you're eating carbohydrates. That's why carbohydrates make your blood sugar go up so quickly. So, all of these changes will impact your digestion, your nutrient absorption, and then you may just not feel as hungry because all of a sudden you're starting to feel satiety. And satiety for a carnivore diet is different than just that fullness factor of your stomach being distended or extended or feeling bloat. A lot of times that's how we feel like we're full, but you won't get that on a carnivore diet because it's not going to fill you up with fiber and bloat. Instead, it's feeling a certain type of satiety. We still remove the carbs, but then we keep the same amount of meat that we ever ate. And that will turn into under eating. Now, the nuance thing I'll say is if you are doing all the right things and eating sufficiently and you are tracking and it literally shows that you're eating sufficiently for at least a week, then maybe it is something beyond the diet. It could be environmentally related and toxin exposures, but that's another conversation. I just wanted to make sure that people understood the consequences of under eating. We get so many women that hear from other people in the space that say, just eat and trust your body and trust your body's signals. But when you change from a high carb diet to carnivore, your signals take time to transition. And then if you're eating insufficient protein and insufficient fat, you're going to wreck your hormones. You're going to wreck the growth of your body. Think about that wall I was talking about. Your brain requires 19% of your total calories. Your liver requires 20 plus percent. And there goes your detox abilities. If you don't feed your body the raw materials, your body will have to selectively prioritize what it needs to subsist. It will no longer thrive, and then it will manifest maybe as hypothyroid, but that is just one symptom. That is not because hypothyroid equals carnivore, it's that we are under eating. It's this fine balance, but you want to make sure that you're giving your body all the nutrition it needs to replete itself, to replenish itself, and to have healing. And if everything is going the other way when you're on a carnivore diet, again, hair loss, poor sleep, low energy, not a vibrancy of health, and after the transition period, so say 6 months later, then you're probably under eating is one big, big factor. And then if you are eating sufficiently and you track for a while, then you can pursue other things. But under eating will never give you vibrancy. It'll never give you health. And in fact, it will actually make you gain weight in the long term. If your body's metabolic rate needs to be at 1600 and you've been dieting and eating at 13, your body will now be functioning at 1300 calories every single day. And then when you go carnivore, you're finally not feeling hungry. So you can all of a sudden eat 800 calories a day. Your body's going to down regulate its metabolism. So anything above 800 is going to make you gain weight. So now all of a sudden on a carnivore diet, if let's say you go out and you eat more than the 800, that amount is going to make you gain weight. And if you're not at a healthy weight at 800 calories, are you going to go to 600, 500? That's when you're going to make your body shut down. And it was never the diet, but the way that we are under eating. This conversation is so important because we see it so often on a carnivore diet where people say, I eat sufficiently. And then when we make them write down what they're eating, most women, especially women, are under eating. So if you are not finding the healing benefits of a carnivore diet, I highly recommend writing down at least for a week what you're eating and be honest about what you're eating. And then reconsider, is it the diet or am I under eating that's not bringing me healing? If I can have a real talk moment with you all, I get the desire to lose weight. I had an eating disorder for over a decade, and I know that desire to be thin, the desire to want to feel seen and feel quote unquote normal, and just be a weight that feels healthy, that you don't feel embarrassed or ashamed or feel not good enough. I totally get that. But under eating and trying to lose weight by not eating, overly fasting, taking diet pills, whatever the thing is not the answer. It's actually a race to the bottom. You will suffer your health. And then long term, no matter what you try to eat, your metabolism may be so imbalanced that it's going to require you to gain weight to actually be able to have a normal metabolic rate. So I'll leave you guys with a story or a study. There was a Minnesota Starvation Study where actually it was done by Dr. Ansel Keys of the 7-country study. But they wanted to know what would happen if people starved. And so after World War II, researchers recruited 36 young men and they made sure they were physically and mentally strong and that they had no signs of eating disorders. And so what happened was initially they had these participants eat 3,200 calories of a varied type of diet. And then after those 12 weeks of eating that way, for the next 6 months, they cut down their calories in half. And so they were eating 1,570 calories. And they defined that as starvation. I will say that a lot of carnivores eat less than 1,570 calories. Yet this study considered that starvation. Just to put that into perspective, if you ate 1.5 ribeyes, that would be considered about 1,570 calories. They ended up finding that a lot of these men that were physically and mentally strong started having food obsessions. Their moods were imbalanced, and they started overeating when they had the ability to have food. So what ended up happening was they had food obsessions take over. So these men, when they first were in this study, I think they were in like a pseudo jail. They would talk about politics and worldly things and things going on in the world and just have really, really robust conversations. And by the end, they were just having conversations about food, but sometimes they wouldn't even connect or have communications. They had overall worsening of mood. So they were feeling hangry, tense. They were feeling moodiness because maybe they were starving. And then they tended to overeat and binge when they had the option of eating. Even during the starvation periods of this study, they would be allowed to drink coffee all day long and have gum. And maybe it was sugar-free gum, I'm not entirely sure, but they had it all day long. And so some of these people would eat packs of gum a day and they would drink coffee all throughout the day. And then they started having distorted self-images of insecurities and anxiety. Their rehabilitation, where they were replenished with calories, wasn't enough. They started binging all the time. And then for some of them, even outside of the study, they never got fully better. So that trigger of starvation caused their nervous system to re-regulate or rewire, that they never got over their belief that there wasn't enough food. And so for the rest of their life, or for the majority that they followed them after, they struggled with an eating disorder. So many of us have these food obsessions because we have limited ourselves for so long, or we've dieted for so long. And then when we allow ourselves to eat, the floodgates open and we can almost control ourselves. Sometimes when we're trying to start a new diet or eat cleaner, we start to feel moody and cranky and we're just hangry all the time. And we try to muster the control to stop any of those feelings. And then many of us, even when we're doing this diet long term, we don't feel like we're thin enough or good enough. In this study, they showed that 36 men that were super healthy, mentally, physically, really well, and robust, no eating disorders, ended up all having some type of disordered eating. Some of them recuperated in the end, but many of them had food obsessions afterward, and all of them had issues during the study. So, how many of us are actually blaming ourselves for not being strong enough to resist a food or not being strong enough to follow a diet, when in reality, our undereating or our chronic dieting has put us in the place that we are having a hard time controlling ourselves? This is not a you're not good enough or you're not strong enough. This is actually human physiology. It is our hormones that when we undereat and we reduce our metabolic rate, we start shutting down the system so that we can survive another day. And then when we do that for such a long time, the body starts to have the symptoms of the Minnesota Starvation Study. And so replenishing ourselves is really the goal. And so even if you don't want to eat a pound and a half or a pound of meat a day, it may be the thing that will allow you to do carnivore long term, or get your hormones back on dial, or get your thyroid back in check. And many of us don't even recognize that we have an eating disorder. But if you follow the cage test, if someone were to try to remove a food from you or remove a meal from you, will you get moody? If someone said you can never eat this food again, will that impact you? If someone says in order to heal, you have to remove these foods, will that make you emotionally upset? These are things that we can consider to see, do I have a imbalanced relationship with food? If you're under eating, I would recommend just eating whatever you can, protein wise and fat wise, to get you through that day. If that means sometimes having to eat pork rinds with cream cheese, I know it's not the best, but if that will allow you to get more nourishment in your system, then I support that. But the goal should not be, I only require 500 calories a day and I feel sufficient. And I've been told that listen to my body and my body only wants 500 calories. That should never be the solution, because you will completely impact your health and wellness long term, even if you don't have a chronic illness. That's why the Minnesota Starvation Study is so powerful in showing this is the damage we can do when we starve. It absolutely dysregulates our nervous system, our desires and thoughts about food. Healing takes time, even our relationships with food. And if you are embarking on a carnivore diet to have healing, then the last thing we should be doing is under eating too. Remember, you don't have to have sufficient calories every day. Just try to have most days where you're eating sufficiently. Because if the goal is healing, I would hate for any of you to be at 80, 90 years old and still struggling with your weight, dieting, trying the next best diet, and not being able to live your life and having that turmoil of obsessing over foods, diets, when you can eat, what amounts you can eat, what foods you're allowed to eat, what clothes you fit into, what's the next event that you have to look good at. It's tiring. And if you can support yourself now and heal at the age of 80, 90, you don't have to obsess about food. And so I hope that this message really helps you to think about, are you under eating? Why are you under eating? And what is the true reason for it? I've been there with the eating disorders. I even went to some of the most critical care for it. So trust me when I say I get it. I know how it is to always feel like you're the one suffering in your head with food obsessions and when you're going to get your next fix and trying to do a diet and be stronger the next day and then struggling again and again. But you can get out of it. The carnivore diet is the best way to get the proper nutrition and to really allow the body to heal. But you have to eat enough. And so I know it's not the funnest conversation for me to say, hey, it's going to take longer to lose weight. But if you're wanting to heal, sometimes the road is longer and maybe it's even the road less traveled, but you can actually heal. And so I will always advocate for your wellness, even if it's not the most popular or fun thing to share. I will always advocate for your wellness. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your body because it's the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.